Yes, good morning, everybody, to our TÜV meetup on trustworthiness AI. I'm very happy that you join us today on a very important topic for us. We have interesting guests from the European Commission, from the European Parliament, and of course our president here, and we focusing on one of the most important topics of the European Commission in this legislative period. AI is the main topic on digitization, and of course it's a question in the international competition on the technology, who is setting the agenda on artificial intelligence, and the question is, where does the European Union stand between the Chinese and the US Americans, who are very into this interesting topics. And of course we have very interesting questions, very important questions. For example, how infuse AI with the European values like privacy and trust and science? How can we have an AI that does what it should do? And how can we protect AI from manipulation and cyber attacks? How can we make sure that AI only does what it's supposed to do? And how can we ensure that products and developments on AI are compliant with our regulation and our frameworks? So very, very interesting question, very important question. I'm very happy to discuss on this discussion today, and I'm very interesting about the points that we figure out today. My name is Joachim Bühler. I'm CEO of the TÜV-Verband, and I now hand over to our wonderful moderator from the BBC, Anja, who is introducing our speakers, our panelists today. And I will listen to the discussion, and you will hear from me at the very end to say goodbye. Now I hand over to Anja. Enjoy the meeting.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bühler, and welcome everyone. Happy New Year. Thank you very much for joining. I'm Anja Sitharam. I'm a former BBC World presenter and now a communications consultant, and I'm also a former science correspondent. So I did a lot about technology and AI in the past, and now in discussions as well. I'm not going to talk very much. I'm just going to introduce the speakers, and then we're going to have a really lively discussion. It's really important and very fascinating as well, but a really important stage in the whole development of the legal framework of AI. So with us today, we have Salvatore Scalzo, who's the Policy and Legal Officer from DG Connect at the European Commission. We have Svenja Hahn, who's a member of the European Parliament and also a member of the Special Committee on Artificial Intelligence in a Digital Age. And we also have Dr. Dirk Steenkamp, who's the president of the TÜV Association and also CEO of the TÜV Nord Group. But first of all, as Europe is gearing up to introduce the first comprehensive legal framework on AI in the world, we're going to hear from Salvatore Scalzo, who's going to give us a little brief overview of the white paper, which was introduced in February 2020. Salvatore, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, I cannot see the presentation. I don't know. Thank you, first of all, for the kind invitation. Yeah, I don't know if you can see the presentation from your side, but because I...
Not yet.
Maybe I'm given the rights to share, then I will do it. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, so Salvatore, while you try and bring up the presentation, let me just ask the other speakers. We are, as I mentioned, we are at the beginning of the new year, and it's a very strange year because many of us are in lockdown. Many of us are working from home. I think the only person that I'm aware of that isn't working from home is Dr. Dirk Steenkamp, who's in the office, but that is quite unusual. And I think, many of us will agree that the whole COVID pandemic has highlighted the importance of digitalization and brought it to the forefront in everybody's lives. But I really wanted to get a sense of where do you think COVID, the pandemic, has left AI, or what AI has meant for COVID. So first of all, Sven Johan, perhaps just a brief reflection from you on that.
On what AI has meant for COVID, or the other way around?
Either way around.
Well, COVID meant basically a lot to everything in the last time. But I think what it has shown, the COVID crisis, is that all medical topics have come much more into the focus, as well as modern medical techniques when we're now talking about the vaccine as well. And I think especially in the health area, AI has a huge potential, and but it's especially a sector where AI is often viewed very critically, because people have very high concerns in this area. So I really hope that this discussion we're having right now is opening up for more friendliness towards new technologies, and as well to better worldwide cooperation in the health sector, because especially with AI we have a huge potential with detecting. One example where I know that AI has been used is on the detection of X-rays. So where especially lungs are infected, often X-rays are taken, and AI is much better in detecting things on X-rays than the human eyes. So this as well can be a push for more and more using AI technologies, but we're still on a beginning phase from a regulatory aspect. The technology is much more ahead, and different countries that have different standards are on very different levels. And I think we've seen how quick health crises are, and we have many health crises that are not so prominent when we take a look at diabetes, heart diseases, when we think about cancer, especially cancer, fighting cancer is one of the priorities of the Commission as well. Then we have huge potential to make our societies healthier with the potential of AI. So I think we're just about getting started and pushing forward health and AI.
So thank you very much. And there you are, you're talking about the potential of AI. You've also talked about the fact that people are perhaps more receptive to the benefits of AI. And of course, you mentioned the different standards, which are all extremely important issues in this discussion we're having today. So Dr. Dirk Steenkamp, I'd like to put the same question to you. So where do you think, what do you think the pandemic has meant for AI? And similarly, has AI benefited from the pandemic?
So first of all, I would like to really give my Happy New Year to everybody who listens and watches our channel today. So given the question what AI might has done to the corona pandemic, I'm quite sure that this genius approach of this ribonucleic acid approach to really developing this new fantastic vaccine has already used AI approaches. I know from myself, I've been a scientist some years ago myself, and I was active in pattern recognition and global optimization problems, and I know quite well from the pharmaceutical industry that optimization problem is one of the key issues, and I'm quite sure that AI has even been used for developing this mRNA approach to the corona-specific virus. I'm also very much looking forward even to quantum-based AI. That means using the capability of quantum computing combined with AI algorithms to even implement much more advanced development schemes for new pharmaceutical, for example, approaches. On the other hand, I think that AI has become more kind of a real world standard. During the Corona pandemic, I think Corona has done a significant push on new schemes like the electrification of mobility. We see that electrically charged cars have become a much more wider part of our daily life. We can see it simply from the number of new electrified cars being released every day. And here we should simply be aware of that most of the algorithms that are, for example, used for the sophisticated ways of charging cars are already relying on artificial intelligence algorithms, at least as part of their software. So I think that AI has become more common and has become a larger part of our daily experience, but in most cases we don't even know about.
Very interesting. Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'll now cross to Salvatore Scalzo. Before I ask you the same question, are you in a position to show your presentation when we've had this first question?
Not yet from my side.
Okay.
But,
okay. So I will ask you first about the AI and the pandemic, and then perhaps you would just like to, in your own words, summarize what, you know, the brief aspects of the white paper and where we are in the whole journey. So just so Salvatore Scalzo, first of all, the pandemic, some reflections on what it's meant for AI and the other way around as well.
No, thank you, first of all, and thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here on behalf of the unit in the Commission. And yes, I share very much what has been said by the other speakers on that. I think that the importance of AI was already well known, and in general of digitalization before the pandemic. But certainly the pandemic increased the level of awareness, that is clear. Because AI proved to be an extremely useful tool also to deal with certain issues that popped up during the pandemic. I think that reference was made probably to one of the most interesting case, which is certainly the diagnostic case. So the possibility that AI increases the diagnostic capacity in the medical sector. We had this, for example, this CT scan, this computer tomography imaging analysis. So AI used in that context with great potential, of course, great potential in the context of diagnostic analysis. That means, but that is not the only, I would say, use. For example, we have seen also examples of robotics used by hospitals also to provide the different kinds of services. So I think certainly that COVID played as an accelerator in terms of uptaking the healthcare context, but also in terms of general awareness. Of course, the challenge also from our side when talking about the CT scan, for example, and this is probably my key comment, is that I think that case also shows, when we talk to the medical community, also shows the need to increase the trustworthiness of those applications. Because of course, in the medical community, there were many concerns about some CT scans, that these CT scans could be used with a certain level of reliability, that they could rely on high quality data in their training and testing. So I think this is also a very, very good business case, which confirms also the need to increase the level of trust in the medical community for the uptake of these tools, and therefore the need for what we call ecosystem of trust.
Thank you, and that's very relevant to the whole conversation today. So perhaps you would tell us a little bit about the white paper without your slides.
Of course. No, it's, yeah, indeed, I can do without slides, certainly, and I will try also to be a bit more brief than expected, also to facilitate the conversation. So certainly it has been mentioned, and the white paper is one from the Commission side, certainly the document, which was adopted in 2020 and which aims really to pave the way to what will come, at least, let's say, from the regulator side, in the context of AI, really to ensure that there can be an upgrade in development of AI within the EU, but also in uptake, in general uptake of AI within the EU. The white paper was published in February 2020, as you certainly know, and fundamentally it is built on two pillars. So the idea that we can provide and upscale the general engagement of the EU in the context of the AI through the building of, on the one side, an ecosystem of excellence. So notably, the possibility to increase research and innovation in the field, and on the other hand, the building of an ecosystem of trust. Both of these pillars cannot really be taken in isolation. So the overall effort really is built on the combination of these two aspects. A few words on the ecosystem of excellence. So as I said, it's really meant to increase crucial aspects for the development of the AI within the EU, linked to research, linked to innovation, linked to further engagement by the SMEs also, not only by big players, but the SMEs, and also the building of skills, which is certainly one of the most important and key aspects in building an ecosystem of excellence. When we talk about an ecosystem of excellence, there are several, let's say, initiatives that the Commission has considered. I will mention just some, let's say, the key ones. First of all, the ecosystem of excellence is based on the coordination with member states, a strong coordination with member states. You might be aware that already in 2018, with the Commission strategy on AI, a first so-called coordinated plan between Commission and member states was adopted at that time. That instrument is basically intended to create joint investment that is done jointly by Commission and member states. So it really lays down and indicates what are the different actions that Commission and member states together want to take in the field of AI. And there will be, as I will say later, a revised version of this plan very soon together with the new regulatory initiative on AI. Then certainly another important element is the building of excellence and testing centers that could also attract brains from all over the world. So the idea is really to create centers of excellence in the field of AI and also for testing of extremely high and qualified level. When we talk about the building of skills, from the Commission side, another important initiative that is mentioned in the white paper is the network of leading universities. So the idea is always really to create the necessary skills, but also to attract the necessary talents in the context of high-level studies across the EU. Then among the initiatives for SMEs, let me just mention the creation of dedicated digital innovation hubs within the EU. You know very well that SMEs need to be supported and assisted in the content and provided also with the relevant expertise on AI. The digital innovation hubs are really meant to, let's say, gather the relevant level of needed expertise and support the SMEs, including possibly with regard to regulatory compliance with the new regulation on AI. Other elements are, for example, also with regard to SMEs, the scale up of an equity fund for innovative AI. So it has started, as you know, with a pilot of about 100 million, but the idea is also to upscale this investment. Then we want also that there is a strong cooperation between the public and the private sector. So we envisage also the creation within Horizon Europe, the program on research, of a new public-private partnership which is dedicated to AI. And let's say, certainly, we want also to upscale the uptake of AI within the public sector. So the idea is really also to have sectoral dialogues to increase the uptake of AI at the level of the public sector, because we think that, of course, public sector is also one of the sectors that would benefit most from the AI uptake. This is for the Center of Excellence, so just really to provide you with a brief overview. On the other hand, we have the conviction that AI can play a major and positive role in our society if it is fundamentally trusted by people. That is, for us, a fundamental assumption. And based on that, the idea of the Commission, which is as laid down in the white paper, is to go ahead with the building of a regulatory initiative. So a horizontal regulation on AI is mentioned in the white paper, which is intended to, let's say, address safety and fundamental right risk. That is a key concept. So both safety and fundamental rights, because we believe that there are that AI poses, of course, it depends on the different applications, but basically both safety and fundamental rights can be at stake when AI is used. Just a few brief considerations that arise from the white paper with regard to this horizontal regulation. Certainly from the Commission side, a key issue is that this regulation must be proportionate. We do not want this to be or to create additional burdens, but really to be extremely, let's say, proportionate to the level of issues that we want to concretely address. That means in our side to adopt a risk-based approach. That is, let's say, a key aspect from the Commission side. So we want that, you know, in particular, we can address what we would consider as high-risk products. You know also that there is a definition of a risk product already, a preliminary observation in the context of the white paper, where we would see basically the risk of the AI system be linked to a combination of high risk, so of sector consideration. So what are the high-risk sectors that should be identified, and that would be combined with the high risk, with the risk of the use of the AI, so what the intended use of the AI system as such. So that is a bit what is outlined in the white paper in terms of risk considerations. With regard to the enforcement, the white paper suggests a combination of ex-ante and ex-post enforcement. So notably from the ex-ante side, there is the suggestion of an ex-ante conformity assessment. I guess this is certainly one of the topics as mentioned at the beginning of today's discussion, but also an ex-post enforcement, notably by competent authorities, what we would traditionally call market surveillance in the context of product legislation. But we don't want only, the white paper does not only focus on high risk, but also suggests a solution, a more, let's say, light solution also for low risk AI, which could be and could take the form of this voluntary labeling. So a labeling which anyway would not be mandatory, but would be fundamentally left on manufacturers' decision. So they could voluntarily adopt this labeling scheme. Having said that, we say why we need the regulation on AI. I already mentioned the level, let's say, the importance to increase the level of trust, but fundamentally there are also important internal market considerations. So first of all, the fact that the AI needs scale also for further development within the EU, especially if we want to compete on a global level. And also because we want to prevent possible fragmentation in the future, because there are already member states who are thinking of initiatives. So we really think the urgency of adopting an EU approach. Let me just conclude. So this is, I hope this provides you with a, let's say, brief but still clear and sufficient overview of what is in the white paper, but there were some steps following that. In conclusion, just to say that there was a public consultation as usual, as is usual practice following the adoption of a white paper by the Commission, and the public consultation was very successful in terms of figures, which proves also the interest in the AI at the EU level. There were more than 1,200 responses from a really widely representative range of stakeholders. And there are very important elements. We can mention some also later, but just to say that there is a fundamental agreement with the urgency and importance of this initiative. 42% say that there is a need for new legislation, and 33% that the current legislation has some gaps. So there is certainly an agreement that action is needed. And from the high risk perspective, 43% agree that compulsory requirements should be limited to a risk application, and even a higher percentage in general agrees that the approach suggested by the white paper, that is to say the risk-based approach, is a correct and appropriate one. Now, in terms of timelines, just in conclusion, I think it's of interest also to this discussion. We have completed the analysis of the public consultation and of all these inputs that we have received. We are currently doing two major and, let's say, pieces of work, which is on the one hand, the revision of the coordinated plan with the member states, as I said, setting the actions to be done jointly by Commission and member states, and also drafting the regulatory proposal on AI. And we can certainly confirm that we intend to stick to the plan as presented in the Commission's official plan for this initiative, which is Q1 2021. So the intention of the Commission is to have those two important initiatives, coordinated plan and regulatory proposal on AI, being adopted by Q1 2021. So basically within some weeks. And that, of course, as you can understand, it's a period of huge business on our side. And of course, I already want to say, I excuse myself if for this reason, sometimes I will have to be, I cannot be too concrete with regard to the solutions envisaged, because as you can easily understand, we are still discussing the form and solutions contained in this regulatory proposal still at the level of the services. So of course, I will have to be extremely prudent and certainly not conclusive. Thank you very much, and I hope that you find that very helpful. I'm happy to continue the discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scalzo. That really is very helpful. And with only a few weeks to go, I can see that you are working very hard there at the Commission to get it all through. I just want to remind the audience, please do send your questions in. We've had a couple in the chat box, and we'll be taking them throughout the discussion. Just based on what Salvatore Scalzo said, I'd just like to ask the two other speakers there. Obviously, we're talking about regulation, we're talking about trust, which is all very important. But then again, does this rules-based approach and the fact that Europe is perhaps lagging behind players like America and China, does the fact that there's a rules-based approach put it at a disadvantage? Svenja.
I think that we have a rules-based approach puts us very much ahead. We're doing a bit of pioneer work in the EU. We're among the first lawmakers that are trying to give a new legislative framework to AI. And of course, in many parts of innovation, the EU is far behind other regions when it comes to innovation. But why it is so? Because we have fragmentation, and I truly believe through a true digital single market, we can foster innovation, support our tech industry from startups to SMEs to big players, and protect consumers. And that only works with the same set of rules that apply through the whole single market. We cannot risk national fragmentation in this area because then we would risk all potential that we have. And through good regulation based on European values, like protection of fundamental rights, based on high level of consumer protection, we can really have AI products that are safe, that are normal to use, just like any other products. So this is really important for gaining trust, for allowing innovation, and for allowing expanding where you operate in which market. So rules and obligation provide legal clarity, and that enables trust. And so this is a huge potential, and we've seen that in other areas where the EU is really setting standards, especially combining it with their values, with their human-centric approach, compared with other areas in the world. So this can really be attractive for tech companies as well to operate here. So a good legal framework protects fundamental consumer rights, and actually we can lead the way then. I'm very certain about that.
Okay, thank you. So Dr. Sternkamp, just putting those questions to you, do you think that it's fragmentation and not rules that could leave Europe behind?
So first of all, I would simply like to recall everybody on the fact that I think Europe has always been extremely well when it came to the combination of technologies. So we have been always a leader, for example, in process automation and robotics. And this is a discipline where many different technologies have to join. For joining different technologies, software, hardware, algorithms, mechanical engineering, and so on, you need standards and you need interfaces, how things actually get connected. And here we have always been very strong historically in really being at the forefront of setting such standards. And when it comes to standards, it immediately also comes to regulation, because also regulation sets up boundaries which are clear to anybody who wants to become a player in this field, and standards as well as regulatory frameworks give a kind of trust and confidence both towards developers of new technologies, of new products, as well as to users and consumers. And I think when it comes to AI, and this also our survey we have conducted in October last year among 500 companies, has clearly shown that when it comes to AI, people are striving for confidence and trust in this somehow new technology. And the overwhelming part of the companies we ask, actually, they want a regulation and they want a regulatory framework to simply have clear rules on liability, for example, which is a big issue, but also, for example, on ethical standards. And I think this Salvatore also has clearly outlined the human being shall be in the center, of any perspective we build up. And so it's not only sufficient that, for example, new AI-based products or processes are safe and secure, but for example, also that ethical standards are met. And when it comes to really, propelling Europe forward in the worldwide competition, China, United States, I think that when it comes to pure handling of data and software, we might not become really the world leader in this field. But when it comes to the combination of these software and data combined with real world application in the automotive sector, in process, in health, in robotics, and so on, I think there is sufficient space for Europe still to put itself at the forefront, at the cutting edge of technological advancement. And I think, however, we can only achieve this by a homogeneous setup of frameworks. That means not by fragmentational regulative frameworks among the members of the European Union, but really by striving for a common a set of standards within, or which are applicable within the overall group of the European member states.
Thank you. Salvatore, just a question that's come in from the audience on the whole issue of European values. And can you be quite brief here? And it kind of picks up what Dirk has been saying, you know, setting standards without being a big player in a particular field could be difficult. So what does Europe need to catch up with the US and China in the AI arena? That's very much your excellence work, isn't it?
Very good. Indeed, that would have been certainly part of my answer. It's undeniable, as mentioned by the previous speakers, that the EU lags behind, and the figures suggest that. If we look at the white paper, just to provide some figures, which are always quite helpful. If we look at, for example, 2016 data on AI investment, we know that in the EU, there was about 3.2 billion investment against more than 12 billion in North America, and about more than 6 billion in Asia. So just this shows, you know, also the difference in terms of investment. But also, if we look at the presence of AI companies, we know that only 3 out of 25 AI clusters, the most important ones, are from the EU, so a relatively low number. And another interesting figure is that we have 1/3 AI companies per million employees compared to the US. These are facts, so we cannot deny that. The issue is that how we can indeed catch up. I think there are a few elements, at least what I think could be important elements. First of all, what you have mentioned. So that, as I said at the beginning, we should never, let's say, take the ecosystem of trust and excellence as separate things. They are part of a unique project, a unique investment. So, because on the one hand, we need to increase the overall investment in the EU. I mean, I showed just some figures. So The idea of also of the ecosystem of excellence is to facilitate 20 billion a year investment between Commission and member states. That is a fundamental importance. So boosting research in the field and boosting skills in the field, because of course we know that we have to create the skills and we have to attract the talents from also non-EU countries. That is fundamental. The second thing is, in my view, also the EU, and previous speakers have mentioned already certain EU advantages in the context, for example, of the business-to-business applications. So, for example, in robotics, the EU, also in healthcare, the EU is a valuable industry. And I think the EU is in a position, for example, to take advantage of the edge revolution. No? We know very well that today most of the data are stored in cloud and they depend on consumers' data. But in the future, that will change, actually. And the most of the data will come from industries, for example, or from the public sector. In that, the EU has a potential. And this data will be computed at the edge. So there will be a reversal in this respect, that the EU, in my opinion, in the Commission's opinion, is in a position, therefore, to take advantage of this huge revolution, also in terms which mostly concern the data and where they are computed. The third thing is, of course, we say the rule book. So I don't want to spend any more on that. I think the idea that we could set standards worldwide, of course, is fundamental also for the competitiveness of our industry. And finally, of course, we need to avoid the concentration. We have an important set of rules, also antitrust rules, that in my opinion are also another important tool for the EU that should be used as appropriate also to gain competitions and avoid, particularly in this field, that can be an abuse of dominant position by certain players. I think the mix of all this can be a good way forward for the EU.
Thank you very much. So much to discuss there, and we could go on that subject, but I want to boil down a bit now to actually looking at the risk categories and also enforcement. We've got 20 minutes left. And one of the questions that's come in, which is very pertinent to the risk-based approach that we're discussing, is that there's been a lot of criticism from civil society about the binary, so they're saying, just two categories of risks to assess various things. How does the Commission develop an approach that leaves the binary approach in favor of a more differentiated risk-based approach? Should there be three risks? Salvatore, very briefly to you, then I'm going to hand over to the other speakers. And if you can keep your answers quite short so we can cover lots of ground. Thank you.
Sure. No, I have to be short because anyway, we are still discussing this. I think certainly we know, for example, during the public consultation, just to say something which could be of interest rather than general reflection, is that, for example, we got some skepticism from stakeholders about the consideration of the sector. There are many stakeholders who say, for example, it's more about how the AI is used rather than the sector in which it is used. So, of course, there is also further reflection to analyze that. We certainly know that we want a risk-based approach. It could take the forms of different layers, that is clear. It is evident that also different way to assess the conformity might be foreseen based, of course, on the risk of the product. And we know that in any case, and I close with this, we know that this risk should be based on what we consider as fundamental harms that we want to protect Europeans against. And these are certainly fundamental rights. These are certainly key interests, like, for example, access to essential public services, of course, human life, to defend human life, and therefore all issues regarding safety. And another key harm from the Commission's point of view is certainly a collective, let's say, what we would say that the defending the public at large, key interest of the collectivity as a whole. So this is certainly something that these are the key interests that we want to protect and that we intend to consider in classifying what should be high risk and what should not be high risk, evidently. Of course, on the level and the difference of this, let's say on the number of layers, this is something which is still under reflection from our side.
Okay, thank you. Dirk, let's have your view, because I know with cybersecurity, there are actually three categories. And what do you think of the fact that there might only be two categories as stipulated in the original white paper?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you, Salvatore, for your outlines that you really mention and clearly point out that this discussion is still ongoing. As I already mentioned, we have published a study, a survey on AI among 500 companies we conducted in October last year. And the outcome also was this binary approach might not really cover the requirements, at least of the industry, but maybe also not of the consumers. Because when it comes to the term risk, the question will be, what do you assess as a risk? It can be a risk concerning your personal safety. It can be a risk concerning cyber security, but it can also be a risk really concerning ethical standards when you talk about, for example, face recognition or algorithms based on AI, which are used in human recruiting processes, where you can think about discrimination, for example, about social backgrounds or whatever what individual brings with them. So we think that this needs a much more broader review. And this is also one of the reasons why we as TÜV organizations have just recently decided to set up an AI laboratory where we really want to develop the testing, but also the classification and verification schemes for actually assessing AI and also the different risk categories as well as different risk levels, and provide politicians also with some experimental background, so to say, in order to come to a clearer resolution on the requirement of different risk classes. And I think we will publish a press release on this AI laboratory today.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much. Sort of news there for everyone. First, you're the first to hear. Svenja Hahn, what do you think? I mean, obviously the MEPs have been looking at the ethics of all of this. That's one of the committees that they've been looking at. What do you think? Do you think it should be more nuanced? There should be more categories than just two?
Absolutely. The other two speakers already mentioned important points. Many and most AI systems or algorithms do not pose any threat. And for us, it's all, of course, about regulation. And it's only high-risk AI that should be subject to stricter specific regulation than other products. And because it wouldn't make sense to have high obligation like mandatory testing or compulsory insurance, for example, for any kind of AI. These were discussions that were had in the parliament. Like, what is high risk is everything that has to do with humans high risk, but I mean, everything I use has to do with a human, is everything that has to do with education high risk. So there were very broad discussions. I think we should not lose ourselves there. I think two categories is the least we should have as proposed by the Commission in the white paper. I personally think we need more categories than two, but however many there may be, I think they have to follow a very clear and legally certain criteria. They should not hamper innovation by putting disproportionate burdens on smaller businesses and startups. But of course, they need to ensure that consumers are protected. And I think we need a very deep assessment, how many categories can be needed and what is actually already covered by existing legislation. Because it's not completely a black hole where AI is coming from. Most of the issues are already covered, but some legislation just needs update. For example, in the product liability directive or the product safety directive, needs just updates that take the specific character of AI into account and updating there. And we need to look very clearly on what characters and what characteristics we're going to update that legislation, and how we then sort it, what do we define it, and then I think we need a clear definition of high risk AI systems that should be listed, So it's very clear, very obvious, and that for the most of AI applications, there is easygoing. Just ask for normal products.
Yeah, so it's interesting you talk about sort of adapting current regulations or extending them. Many things, applications are covered. And after all, data is hugely covered in Europe with the GDPR, for instance. I just wanted to ask Mr. Scalzo a question that's come in from the audience. How far is it foreseen to use the proven regulatory structures of the new legislative framework for AI regulation? Are you able to answer that?
Yes, I think so. Of course, still make this, I mean, with the usual caveat. But certainly already, I think that we recognize, first of all, from the Commission that the NLF framework is certainly a framework which has worked to advance the internal markets, and to therefore it's a key element that has worked. It is recognized by everyone, has worked in product legislation. So of course we attach a lot of value to it. And you can see also that the white paper builds significantly and extensively on NLF principles. And let me also add that it has been mentioned several times, and we fully agree in this discussion, that the new framework should be proportionate. Proportionate from our side means also another thing. We know that many AI applications which are possibly to be considered as a high risk invest sectors that are already the object of sectorial legislation. Think of medical devices, which has been mentioned already several times. Let's think of industrial machinery. They're already covered by sectorial pieces of legislation. So if we want to be proportionate, that is clearly a full conviction from the Commission. We need to ensure that this is that the new regulation will integrate the existing legislation, does not represent additional and useless duplications, but is in a position to integrate and complement existing legislation in an appropriate and proportionate manner. I want to highlight that because it's really part also of a more, let's say, of the shared project to make this regulation fit for purpose and proportionate to the needs that it wants to address.
Okay, thank you. So we heard there that Mr. Sternkamp, that an AI lab is going to be set up to look at risk-based categories, at the risk categories. Let's look at enforcement now as well. So what are the requirements that are needed to ensure that the standards are maintained? Do you have an overview at all?
Yeah, so I think everybody is aware that TÜV organizations, they have so the testing and the verification and the certification really at the heart of our business. And so we are very much used to schemes like the NLF, so the new legislative framework, which is also a risk-based approach, and which also outlines, let's say, all the boundary conditions which are applied to CE marking, for example. And what we think about is that there's always a basic principle for the acceptance and the volume or mass acceptance of new technology, and this is definitely trust and confidence. And trust and confidence by the public is definitely achieved simply by confidence in new technologies, in new products related to new technologies. And that's why we are very much in favor of independent assessments by independent third-party organizations like we are as TÜV organizations and companies. And that's why we are very much in favor that at least the high to higher risk AI-based products shall be assessed and shall be certified by independent third-party conformity bodies. And we also think that it might be really helpful also in the economical sense to push and really propel forward the broad use of AI-based products, that even for low risk or non-risk applications of AI, There could be a labeling on a voluntary base, for example, which companies are able to subscribe for, because we think that this will substantially increase the broad and volume trust of communities, of people applying such products or processes based on AI, and thereby really push our European economy forward.
Is that enough? Is the voluntary certification enough?
No, this is what I just outlined. This might be applicable to non or low risk AI application. But I mean, when it comes to autonomous driving, when it comes to robots cooperating with human being, safety aspects as well as cyber security aspects are at the forefront of consideration. And this definitely requires third-party independent assessments.
So I'd like to bring in our other two speakers there. Salvatore, I see you nodding there. Do you agree?
No. I mean, as I say, we fully agree, and I think we in the white paper we indicated clearly that for us the conformity assessment as working under NLF principle is certainly the most viable way forward. So we agree with that, and of course we will have to see how this will work in practice. But that is certainly from the side of the Commission what we believe in. On the side of the as far there is another important element which was mentioned, which is about the cyber security. Certainly, when we talk among our requirements, you know, the requirements which has been mentioned in the white paper for high-risk AI, we also say that AI shall be robust, and robust certainly means also secure. And this is so important to mention. So we want to attribute the relevance also in the future, let's say, in terms of future requirements and also assessment of AI system, that security is really one of the top priorities. I agree also, just on one specific point which was made, that in a context of interconnection of devices and systems, probably from the security side, sometimes, you know, the difference between low risk and high risk is very thin, because there could be a low risk system that, of course, could affect, you know, a network which is of high importance. So, of course, in the logic of interconnection, it is not sometimes easy from the cyber security perspective to distinguish what is low, what is high risk. But I conclude just by saying that we should not take the future AI framework, which, by the way, will ensure, you know, certainly will give the right importance to security, but it shouldn't be taken in isolation, because you know that there are also other pieces of legislation within the EU already that deal with cybersecurity. We have already a labeling on cybersecurity. There is a 2019 regulation, and there is also, you know, Commission's reflection on a possible mandatory horizontal regulation on cybersecurity aspects. So I think this is the proof that we take this topic seriously. It will be considered extensively in the AI regulation under the topic of robustness, but there is also other work already done and ongoing in this respect. Yeah.
Thank you. And just some thoughts from you, Svenja, as well. How can compliance with standards be ensured?
Well, I think first and foremost, we need to ensure high quality of training data sets for AI. This will absolutely define the quality and the compliance of AI systems. I think, yeah, bias through poor data sets or risk through poor data sets is actually one of the greater threats. And then the case of high risk has been mentioned often in the report from the Parliament, the first report from URI. For example, there's a clearly defined annex suggesting that this could be a way based on clear criteria, for example, defining which types of self-driving cars would actually be considered high risk. So we really need to ensure that it's clear for everyone under which framework would you be operating with your AI. And then, of course, we need a certain level of access through competent authorities in general. So we need to enable to have a good working institutional oversight. And I think we should not repeat mistakes from the GDPR. I think we need to ensure proper enforcement in all member states and not just leave it to each member state to decide how they enforce that. So, and of course, there comes as well, it was already mentioned, the independent assessment organization into the game. I absolutely think that they will play a crucial role in assessing conformity of AI systems. But of course, they have to be subject to assessments themselves when we're talking about this. Because we need to, I mean, the goal is that we have the same level of quality, same criteria all over Europe to prevent fragmentation, to ensure safety. And if we have a framework like that, that would be good. But of course, we don't want to go into a system of over-regulation. So it really depends on the use case and the type of the system, what kind of control is needed, what kind of ex ante control is needed. And then, of course, we need to see what system there comes. The Parliament made some suggestion on that. We're very much looking forward what the Commission is proposing. But I think what is clear to all of us, we need common standards, especially for product safety, and we need common control and assessment standards. And that goes all the way, testing, labeling, legal standards, liability standards. And once we have that framework, I think we can ensure that we have safe operating systems that people actually can trust and feel safe using and confident using.
Thank you very much. A whole wish list there and a very comprehensive summing up of what's needed, and it's quite a lot. And I would love to go on talking with all of you today. I'm going to have to wrap up quite soon, but I just want one final question from all of you, just looking ahead, because we are at the start of 2021 and in a crucial phase in the AI regulation and legislation. So how different do you think the AI landscape will look in Europe in about 5 years' time? So I'll start with you, Dirk, first of all.
Yeah, so sometimes you are allowed to dream. My dream would be really that in 5 years from now, we have a fully implemented 5G infrastructure at the forefront of 6G mobile communication, where devices actually have started to autonomously interconnect with each other, because this is actually behind the 5G technology. It's not about data speed and so on. It's about self-connectivity of devices, actually, that we have a fully rolled out Industry 4.0 at the edge of 5.0 already, that we have a worked out legal framework within overall Europe, homogenized, that we have defined clear classes of risk assurance, maybe very similar to our Cybersecurity Act, that we have an implemented conformity assessment, as already underlined by my two other panelist speakers here, that I can actually use myself already autonomously driving cars, at least up to level 4, that I'm surrounded by autonomously working robots which are operating safe and secure, and that our European industry plays a substantial role in all of that. For example, by our really great companies like NXP, Infineon, or STMicro, providing the chipsets for edge computing, which is an integral part of the products we use in 5 years from now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's quite a vision out there in 5 years' time. Sven-Johan, how about you?
I truly hope that we'll move forward quickly with a waterproof and legally very clear framework for AI. And well, given what we're hearing from the Commission, I'm very, very positive that we're going to have a very fruitful cooperation with the co-legislators. I hope that in 5 years we have an excellent legal framework for AI, where it is additional needed to update what we already have, to cover new technologies like AI, and yeah, really that we have paved the way for tech innovation in Europe, where startups and SMEs are able to scale up with legal certainty. Consumers will be very well protected, no matter what kind of product, AI or classical. They're using it, they're confident with using this. And when we manage that, that would be great. But I mean, with the framework we have ahead and the work we have ahead, in 5 years, if we have the framework, that would be great. But then hopefully, I don't know, let's say in 10 years from now, that the EU is on top of AI innovation in the world, if we manage today to regulate smartly, technology open, and with in favor of innovation in mind.
Thank you, Salvatore. Regulate smartly. A lot of work to do.
Indeed, to follow up along the same lines we are very first of all, we are convinced that we will have an excellent relationship with the co-legislators, because I think that the objective is common. So we are extremely confident about, from the Commission side, this overall strategy. So we really want that already by 2025 we can see the effects of this comprehensive strategy, and starting to reverse the figures, which sometimes are not too exciting, that I presented in one of my earlier interventions, so vis-a-vis the overall world and other jurisdictions. So I mean, we mentioned today the ecosystem of trust, the ecosystem of excellence, but when I say comprehensive strategy, we should not forget, for example, the whole data strategy, because when we talk about AI in the EU, it's also about the availability of data within the EU. Let me mention just the act on, making availability of the data of the public sector, or the new data spaces. So all this is, of course, another important piece of this overall project, and it has been mentioned by other speakers, the liability rules that will also complement the strategy for better and increased trust in the AI. So we are really confident from the side of the Commission, and working with the co-legislators, that we can really ensure that by 2025 also the position of the EU on a global level will be much better, and certainly compared to what we have now. That is, I would say, not wishful thinking, but I would say strong confidence, because I think we put in place a good and workable strategy.
Thank you very much to all our three speakers. And I think the overarching themes there's agreement that there mustn't be fragmentation, and that you're all optimistic about the future, and that Europe will have a big role to play in 5 or 10 years' time. So thank you all three very much for that, and good luck, Salvatore, with all the work you've got to do. And I'd like to bring back Dr. Bühler now for some closing thoughts.
Yes, thank you very much, and thanks a lot to all the panelists, and of course all to our guests for this very interesting discussion. We have touched many interesting and valuable aspects of this AI topic, and I'm very happy to hear that we agree on a smart regulation, and learned from maybe the social media debate, where we had at the beginning an initial lack of regulation, and where we have now a lot of problems, for example, with the question of freedom of speech, where one of the most famous people of the world has no Twitter account anymore. And I hope we learn from this discussion to have a smart regulation on this AI. Of course, there are some questions that are still to be discussed in the next week, and the Commission and the European Parliament has a lot to do. For example, are 2 risk levels enough for the artificial intelligence, or do we need maybe 3 or even more? And what kind of role does the self-declaration play? What kind of role does third party play? And where comes the governmental authorities into the game? So very interesting question, a lot of work to do. I'm very happy that we had this discussion today, and I'm very happy to hear that we have some kind of a fundamental agreement on this topic, that we want to be one of the top players and set the agenda on the international agenda with a smart regulation. So thank you very much. The last sentence is to say, I'd like to invite you to the next TÜV MeetUp on the 9th of February. There we want to focus on the Safer Internet Day, on a special topic on the IoT security from a consumer right perspective. And you are all invited to join us at the 9th of February. There will be an invitation soon. So stay safe, stay healthy, and have a good day. Thank you very much for joining us today.